We're going to get a bit more tactical here. Chris's group has spent. Okay. Go ahead and talk. Chris's work group has been thinking more in strategic terms about how we can make use of common business cases. As we've been developing out transport, we found a need to spin up a second sub-work group to deal with the shape of data that's being passed around. So one of the things that we found very quickly is, we'll just skip over the first couple slides. Let's see if I can make this go forward. There we go, blah, blah, et cetera, et cetera. So we got to the point where it was, what are we trying to do? How are we trying to do this? We found, as we started looking across the landscape, that there were lots and lots and lots of different ways of implementing how things went together. The data dictionary has standard names, standard fields. Those standard fields were turning into a big pile of fields. You'd find things all over the map. And then we add in, or stitch in, the local data. Everybody has local data. It's always going to be there. This led us to think, okay, well, what are we going to do here? How are we going to handle the fact that we've got lots of data sets, they're all really different. This is going to make integration slow and brittle. We've had this happen inside of RETs. How are we going to fix this going forward with transport? So Josh spent a lot of time over the last, 6 months thinking about this, coming up with some ideas about how we deal with it. How do we handle both the data dictionary fields and things like hyperlocal things? He changed the words, but my usual one is distance to volcano. People in Hawaii care about that. Everywhere else don't care. But it's really important in that market. So maybe in Maris, people care how far you are from the Gateway Arch. Hyperlocal, it's really important. So how are we going to handle all those and stitch them together to make that happen? So Josh's thinking has been coming forward with shapes. We'll call it shapes. People get a little bit queasy when we start talking more technical.
Like schema.
Keep it, yeah, schema is like, don't say that word. What is schema? Well, okay, let's just rephrase it and sell it to a different audience. So we're calling them shapes. And data shapes let us do things like take the RESO data dictionary fields, take our local data, the things that are important in your market, and allow us also to add in things like synonyms. If we wanted to add French, I see you guys over there, or Spanish, or synonyms that are locally used but are not in the data dictionary, so things like jalousied versus louvered windows is a good case. I see I see Greg smiling. He's heard that 9,000 times, I'm sure, in the last year. Put those all together into a shape, and by using common shapes, we can then start solving problems about the way we represent data in a consistent manner to make things faster and easier to adopt when you go into a new market. Those sorts of things are going to give us the ability to bring these in a consistent manner, including the local fields. So if we say, here's how you add your local fields in, we're not telling you what the local fields are. That's your business. You know what those are. But here's how you do it so we can consistently extract that programmatically to make it easier to go and get your data and present it in different applications that are important in your market.
If we could go back one.
Sorry?
I just want to say something about this slide.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
So there's a lot of stuff that's very
You
technical.
probably need them. Oh, you got it. Okay. Good.
There's a lot of stuff that's very technical in this group, but we've actually done considerable work to reframe the discussion to make it consistent with the data dictionary. So by default now, anything they design, we'll just support, and you don't need to come to these meetings. I mean, you should. Please come to the meetings. You can go to the data dictionary, and that will be anything they create there with resources or fields or enumerations or collections, they'll just map over to what we have right in transport. We don't have that scenario right now, and that's why what Chris has described with all these applications not talking to each other, that's why that's a problem. They all have different data shapes. So even though they're using the data dictionary.
Right. Thanks for that point.
Yep.
And I think we covered this off. Your local data is yours. Synonyms, we have both synonyms for fields and enumerations that are relevant to your market, as well as allowing adaptation to other languages. LA, I believe, CRMLS has at least 4 languages that are popularly asked for, just serving markets like Japanese, Spanish, obviously, And I forget what the other one was. It was
Chinese
was it Chinese? Yeah, or Mandarin rather. So that allows you, if we say a consistent way to say, if this field is being used in this market, here's how you take the synonym and apply it. We're not telling you what those synonyms are, anything like that. It's just how you technically take it from the idea of the synonym to the actual implementation technically. Finally, it gives us a way to come up with standard shapes that we can then express as the resources that everybody knows. It also allows us to add to those resources in a consistent manner to allow you to have local resources that are specific to your market, but in the same sort of generalized technical shapes that we can then use to more easily code around.
And the goal here is actually, good, if you could go back. With this picture, you see all these different data dictionary resources in there in one bundle. The goal is to actually extend these shapes across just one resource where you can get all the related data in one unpackable bundle. And they'll have all the key relationships. You don't have to read OData necessarily. You can just do that by looking at the dictionary and extract the keys. So that's much different than we have right now. We have a lot of heavy markup around making that happen, and we want to make that like really light for people. So.
Right.
We can also combine shapes. This is actually an important thing. So a lot of aggregators actually pull all the data in all the fields, but because there's different kinds of feeds, they sometimes have to pull 2 feeds and then send those feeds down to the consumers. So that's extra requests, extra traffic. We can actually use this to annotate our fields so that people can combine shapes. So that if IDX has some set of fields and some of those overlap, and then BBO has some set of fields, we can pull all that together in one payload and then extract those different shapes. You know, the IDX shape. As an aggregator, you would actually then do that work to send that to your consumers. You don't have to make a lot of requests to the MLS. So.
Right. All right, we'll move on. So right now, we've got a couple of cases that exist right now. If you're a vendor dealing with only an MLS, it's not too hard. It's a bit of work, but it's not too hard. And there's a whole bunch of those cases. Also, front end of choice. Okay, we've got a bunch of vendors. They're going against a single MLS. Same kind of effort level to get that to happen.
And
we get a bit.
For every arrow there, everybody has to do basically custom mapping. That's what these arrows are. So if you want to go into MLSA in this case, it's fine if you're one vendor, because if you control that market, you're the sole producer in that market. But the next person who wants to come in there has to map to that contracted system. And that's not always a data dictionary.
Right. And then it gets a little more complicated when you have system of choice. So you've got multiple systems. I'm a vendor. I want to come into your market. I now have to map to each of those different systems of choice to be able to interoperate with all the systems that you have on offer. Now we're talking about some real work. That looks all nice and well and good, but now we get into, here's what the real world looks like. I'm going somewhere. I've got mapping exercises, and obviously, this is much messier in real life. We just tried to simplify it to show a bit of the complexity. Is you've got people who have to do multiple custom mappings now, and it's painful. It's really not how we want the standard to work.
There's actually 650 of those nodes on the right, so
Yeah,
so good.
and there's not always a connection between them, and people are joining and breaking those connections continuously, and it's very difficult. It makes for very brittle code, which is not an ideal situation. So
Yeah, if somebody just changes one mapping on one of those lines, that whole system is not good anymore.
And of course, those of you who do that for a living know that those nodes change all the time, and sometimes unexpectedly.
In the middle of the night and
yeah,
no
and
warning.
It's like everything's broken the next morning, and it's like, oh, we're fixing something today. So we want to address that, and common schema we think is a way to at least give us an opportunity to lower that friction that we get with this kind of model. Obviously it leads to low interoperability. It's just the nature of that beast. We want to fix that. The goal of this work group is to make that higher interoperability, lower friction. There's always going to be a little bit of work that you're going to have to do if the local fields are important to you. Obviously work's going to have to happen with synonyms, but synonyms should be very repeatable. Everywhere is going to treat it the same if we say, here's how you do the annotations for synonyms. Yeah. And that's the local market. If you don't care about the local market, you're an IDX vendor or something like that, common schema should make it really, really easy for you to go to the next place. If all you consume is the fields in the IDX payload, for example, you should be able to go one to the next in the future. We had a great talk earlier today, and we got some problems we've got to fix on the transport side, but on the data side, common schema will make this much, much easier. So
what happens to our
one up a bit?
Yeah, what happens to our previous picture if everybody uses a common shape? Well, go ahead.
Back to
Oh, sorry.
this one.
Yeah.
Go forward.
So it essentially makes it so each system then only has to be responsible for reading and writing into that shape. And they also have to support the ability for fields to come in that are defined in the shape that they don't currently have, but they'll be transported in a regular place. So we don't have the exponential mapping case anymore. There are definitely going to be local fields like Paul said, but we're going to approach that in a very straightforward way that allows you to automate most of that. So we'll start with the standard fields, and exterior features is a good example. There's already a set of exterior features defined. All we're asking for with the shape is that if you have a local feature, please put it in the exterior features. Don't put it in some weird sidewalk features or something else that's not defined, because that requires a human to go and extract that information. If you put it in the same bucket that it's supposed to be in, a program can do that, right? And if it needs to show up in a pick list, it's already there. So we don't have to do that mapping part anymore. We'll never get away from all of it. There'll be some mapping, but if we could automate 75 to 85% of it, it's a huge gain over what we have right now.
All right, so the takeaway for the people in the room is that these conversations start at the moment that you're trying to have a conversation with your system vendor about how do we map our data. I've talked to Amy multiple times about Trestle, and there's an effort that they can do to help that mapping start. But it always winds up at the MLS for the final analysis. So that common shape is going to be a conversation you're having with your vendor at the point in time where you're moving forward with it. As we add clients, and we had some very detailed slides about this that we'll be happy to talk more in detail about, but as you add vendors, those vendors are going to come in and say, we need a couple more fields. Can you add those fields? And so the conversation will continue as you add vendors to your system. Obviously, doing the local mapping is going to take some work. Obviously, creating synonyms, if that's important in your market, is going to take work. But if we make it standardized how you do that, then anyone coming into the market who needs to use that will at least have an opportunity to make that much easier to do by writing code around it.
And actually, in this case, some of this is a business issue, right? We have to get the MLSs to start asking for these things in the contract. We have to get them to ask to start building this catalog, and they don't necessarily have to publish it to the public. I mean, it's already there with metadata. They could. But it's at least there for the vendors who have to come into that market. They don't have to sit there and do discovery on every single new mapping. So.
And a potential benefit from this is at some point we can build a catalog for the market of what data is available. Before someone enters a market, they can know, oh, I need to ask for this information. This information exists, this information doesn't exist, maybe we need to ask them to add those fields to their local system. So I think there's something to be done, and the conversation should start now because it's going to take years to get this completed.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.